We have a tremendous tradition in this country going back to the American Revolution of great heroes who have worn our uniform, and we are grateful to you for what you've done and what you continue to do for our nation. If I may for a minute, I'd like to take us back to the 1930s. If you remember your history, back in the 1930s, America was about 10 years past World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. We had pretty much decided we had done our international thing. We had so tremendously downsized our military. We wanted nothing to do with events abroad. Our friends in Europe, the ones that we had fought with in World War I, were retrenching themselves. And during the same time, a very small group of people in Germany took control of that country, the Nazi Party, with this seemingly crazy idea that they would use their position to take Germany and grow it and spread Nazism throughout Europe and the world. At the same time, the military imperialists in Japan were seeking to expand the role of Japan, not just in Asia, but throughout the Pacific. As these two countries, as these two groups of people endeavored to do those things, we in the West, we in America and people in Europe, thought that, well, we can manage this. These are two relatively small powers. We really took care of Germany in World War I. Japan's a small Asian country. They can't get very far. We can handle this without having to be prepared ourselves militarily. And slowly but surely, both Germany and Japan began to expand. Germany in Europe, Japan in Asia and the Pacific. Now, this time period was a critical time period for everybody around the world because we were going through a great worldwide depression. And so people were focused more on what we could do to get our economies going again. And once again, defense matters, military matters, foreign matters took a back seat. On December 7th of 1941, my father was in basic training in Texas. He was one of those few people that were drafted before Pearl Harbor. They didn't have enough real guns for him to train with, so the men in his basic training group trained with toy wooden rifles. And after Pearl Harbor occurred, they took those men like they took many other men across America, put them on railroad trains, and sent them out to the West Coast because they knew they were going to be shipping them somewhere in the Pacific. They didn't know where, they didn't know how, they didn't know what they were going to do, they just knew they had to send them there. So they took those men and they stuffed them in a former luxury liner, the Queen Mary, took everything out of it, all the luxury stuff taken out. They took out the lifeboats and the safety jackets. So if that ship had gone down, all those men would have been lost because they were desperate to put as many men in those ships as they could. And they shipped them over to the Pacific and figure out what they were going to do with them once they got them there. The story wasn't much better in the European theater, as you know, who were woefully underprepared for that conflict. If you think about where we were then and where we seem to be rapidly approaching now, there are some parallels. When you are woefully unprepared for rapidly expanding military adversaries, the results can be and have been tragic. Millions of people around the world died in World War II. We really don't know how many because we can't get accurate figures from what happened in both Asia and in Russia. We lost many good men and women in that attack in Pearl Harbor. Now, let's fast forward to where we are today, literally today. Putin's Russia is at an advanced stage of where Germany was in the 1930s. If you will remember, Hitler didn't start off trying to do everything at once. He slowly did it. He worked his way up to it. Militarized the Rhineland, annexed Austria, then took the Sudetenland. Why Austria and the Sudetenland? Because he was protecting people who spoke German. What is the pretext that Vladimir Putin is using today in the Ukraine? He's protecting people in the Ukraine who speak Russian. It is the same playbook. It is the same page out of the same playbook that we saw in the 1930s. We're struggling coming out of this worldwide recession across the world today. We don't want to have to be involved in foreign affairs. We don't want to have to put ourselves out defensively. In this country, we've gone through this very difficult war in Iraq, and we're coming to the end stage of the war in Afghanistan. and we don't want to have to push ourselves back out there. At every stage in the 1930s, when world leaders could have reacted both to Germany and Japan, they failed. And the results are what's in the history books. Putin started with Crimea. He is trying to create a pretext to take the eastern Ukraine. He will not be satisfied with eastern Ukraine. He will push into all of Ukraine. He will want to take Moldova. He will want to take Georgia. He will want to push to the very eastern edges of the NATO countries, where we have an Article 5 obligation to protect our allies. He is fomenting disruption in the Ukraine as we speak. The Vice President is there today, and the Vice President said something I thought was very interesting today. He said that the Russians needed to quit talking and start acting. Ladies and gentlemen, today the United States of America needs to quit talking and start acting, because Putin will not stop where he is. You will hear public reports that there are 40,000 Russian troops massed on the eastern border of Ukraine. Those reports are wrong. It's 80,000 troops. And they've proven by what they've done in Crimea and in the eastern part of Ukraine that this is not the old Russian army. This is not the Russian army or defense forces that we remember from 14 or 15 years ago. They've gotten a lot smarter. They've gotten a lot tougher, and they've invested a lot of money in what they're doing. At the point at which Putin is able to get on the eastern fringe of NATO countries, he threatens the Baltic region, he threatens Poland, he threatens the Czech Republic, he threatens Slovakia, and he threatens Hungary. And we could be drawn into that conflict because of those NATO obligations we have. Looking over to Asia, remember what I said earlier about Japan. Look at what China is doing today. China is investing in its military in every aspect. Some of the most frightening testimony that I've heard on the Armed Services Committee is about what China is doing to try to destroy our satellite system. If you want to shut down America, certainly shut down our defense apparatus, go take out all of our satellites. And Russia's working on that and has the technology to do it today. And what do they want? They want to expand throughout East Asia. They're already expanding into the Eastern Pacific. They're already in the Eastern China Sea and the South China Sea. They threaten Japan. They threaten South Korea. They threaten Thailand. They threaten the entire landmass of Asia and our position in the Pacific. The President talks about a shift, a pivot to Asia. Unfortunately, we can't just pivot to Asia. We can't pivot away from Europe, and we can't pivot away from the Middle East. Things are not any safer or more stable today in the Middle East than they were 10 years ago. Iran wants to get a nuclear weapon, and no matter what we do in talking to them, they will slowly move to obtain that weapon. And if they do, they destabilize the entire Middle East. Saudi Arabia won't stand for a nuclear Iran. Israel won't stand for a nuclear Iran. And if you look at Iran and in North Korea, you will find nations that are governed by people who do not act within the bounds of ordinary, rational, international diplomacy and discourse. The man that is running North Korea today is a madman, and he has nuclear weapons. South Korea has informed our country today that they believe that the North Koreans are about to undergo another nuclear test. And the North Koreans are trying to get themselves in a position where they can threaten more and more the population of South Korea, and they've done pretty well so far. Every time they shoot another missile, test another missile, fly close to a vessel, they challenge not only South Korea, they challenge us because of our treaty obligations there. If you look at America and our ability to project our armed forces, you see a troubling picture. There are 300 Russian naval ships in the Black Sea today. We don't have 300 ships in the entire U.S. Navy. Now, many of those ships in the Russian Navy in the Black Sea are small surface combatants, littoral combat ships. We have a couple of destroyers in the Black Sea, and the Russians are buzzing them with their jets. We have an asymmetry of our warfare because we need to get those small surface combatants. We need to get littoral combat ships in the Black Sea, in the Pacific, around Africa. so that we can be in symmetry with the people that we are in contest with. The best example of a small surface combatant, a littoral combat ship, is what we're making right over there at Alston. Over 400 feet long, doing 45 knots, fully loaded in the open sea, with a variety of missions that it can accomplish. I likened it when I talked to Secretary Mavis, the Secretary of the Navy, before our committee, to Muhammad Ali. You know, Muhammad Ali didn't stand there in the boxing ring and wait for people to hit him. He moved around, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. That's what that ship does. And we're going to have small surface combatants to match up with the Russians and the Chinese and adversaries around the globe. And that's not enough. We have to keep the rest of our fleet. We have to keep the ships that we're making over at Huntington Ingalls across the line in Mississippi. By the way, did you know that there are 2,000 people working at Huntington Ingalls that live here in southwest Alabama? Those ships are important too. It is no coincidence that on Monday of the week that Putin decided to take Crimea, the Secretary of the Defense stood up publicly and said, we're going to reduce American force levels to the lowest level since before World War II, when my dad was in basic training. Those two things are connected. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish we could close our eyes, click our heels like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and be transported to some magic place, some magic time, where you don't have to stand up and defend yourself. There is no such place. There is no such time. And unfortunately, at this time in the history of humankind, there is no other country to stand up against the bullies of the world other than the United States of America. There is no other country in Europe that can stand up to Vladimir Putin like America can. There is no other country that can stand up against China in Asia and in the Pacific like America can. There's no other country in the Middle East that can stand up to a nuclearized Iran like America can. We are the indispensable nation. And for once in the history of humankind, the indispensable nation is not some country that's trying to just expand itself to get more territory, more control. It's a country that's built on democratic principles, on the principle of liberty. That's all we want. We don't want your land. We don't want your nation. We want you to be free. We want the world to be free. We want the economy of the world to be free. And we want the bullies to be held in check so that the rest of us can live the lives that we want to live. Unfortunately, our president has been sending out the wrong signals. We all grew up with bullies. You know what a bully's like. If he thinks you're weak, he's going to attack you. And bullies go, they find the cues. What am I looking for that's going to tell whether a weak person is? And when they find the weak person, they attack. We've got to stand up. Our president's got to stand up. I promise you the Congress will stand behind the president if he will stand up. I was privileged to preside over the House the day we passed the bills to help him and help the Ukrainians. It was an incredible scene to look out there from the Speaker's chair and see Democrats and Republicans working closely together to pass that legislation. Because as one voice, our Congress, Democrats and Republicans, we spoke. We want the President to have the tools that he needs to do what we have to do. And the President needs to take those tools and use them. Unfortunately, at this very time when we need a strong America, we've been pulling back. And the Congress is not to be absolved here. We have passed budgets that have dramatically cut spending for the defense of this country to the point where we threaten the safety of our country. I see it on the Armed Services Committee literally every day. For instance, the sequestration cuts have allowed to take effect these last year have affected our military more harshly than any other part of the federal government. 50% of the cuts that we've made in federal spending are represented in the military sector, even though defense only makes up 18% of the federal budget. 50% of the cuts to 18% of the budget. I'm worried that there are people in Washington that want these cuts, that they think somehow it benefits our country to weaken our military. And when we do that, we undermine our military's ability not only to project power, but also to provide for our own security. General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recently said, Quote, "If you want the military to be doing what it's doing today, then we can't give you another dollar. Our defense system cannot take one single more cut. In fact, it's my belief, talking to the staff of our committee and studying the reports that they give us, that we've got to start going back up again on military spending." The President knows this. He has smart people around him. He gets the same information that I get, and probably a lot better. He's going to have to start making some difficult choices, and we in Congress have got to start making difficult choices with him. We're being forced, because of these cuts, to cancel preventative missions that could potentially keep us out of conflicts around the globe. One of the most important things you understand about power is if you're powerful enough, you don't have to use it. And we've weakened ourselves to the point where we're now going to have to start using it, not in a preventative case, but in something far more important. The cuts we've made means that patrols in the Gulf of Aden are being stuck in port, and that anti-drug running patrols in the Caribbean are being pulled back. The end result is that we have an America, much less the entire world, that is more vulnerable to these conflicts. And I don't want you to hear me to say for 1 second that I exempt the Congress from the responsibility here. We passed these budgets and appropriation bills that have hurt our military, and we've got to be a big part of bringing ourselves back. I've said since I was elected that we in government have to start making choices about what we will fund and what we will not fund. The columnist George Will says all the time, to govern is to choose. It's time for our President and the Congress together to start choosing better. We've got some problems in the budget that the President presented this year. In his 2015 budget request, the President includes $345 billion less than the minimum the military has testified it needs for the next 10 years to execute an effective defense strategy. $345 billion less. Since taking office in 2009, the President has directed over $1 trillion in cuts to the military. Under current policy, the Army will reduce active duty soldiers from 520,000 to 420,000, with the Army Guard and Marine Corps experiencing similar reductions. Today, 7 Air Force squadrons are not ready to deploy. Only 4 of 40 Army Brigade combat teams are ready to deploy. The House Armed Services Committee, on which I serve, estimates that overall full-spectrum readiness may take nearly a decade to recover. We don't have that kind of time, with Vladimir Putin knocking on the door in Eastern Europe and China continuing to exert its influence, and with rogue regimes like North Korea and Iran disconnected from reality. We have got to start making America strong again militarily. In Syria, we allowed Russia to step in and play the role of a successful moderator when we were too timid to take action, when we drew a red line and we shrunk back from our own red line. And notice I didn't say the President, I said we, because when he acts for every one of us in this room. That was a tragic mistake, and that told Vladimir Putin a lot about our weakness, and it told people in China and Iran and in North Korea and in other places where people wish us ill about our weakness. No one should be surprised that that very same week that the Secretary of Defense got up and announced all those cuts in our budgets, that the Russians marched in and took Crimea. We need strong, fast, versatile, and lethal military to counter the growing ambition of these regimes in Russia and China and North Korea and Iran and others. What we're going to have to do throughout the government, and particularly when we talk about defense, is we're going to have to start making the decisions where we can go back up to making 52 littoral combat ships and not 32 like the Secretary of Defense called for 3 months ago. We're going to have to find ways to go back and make sure we have the number of jets and the people to fly those jets that secure the skies not only over America but the world. We need to put a missile defense system in Eastern Europe and point them at Russia and tell Vladimir Putin we mean business. We have got to go back and be the strong country militarily that we've had to be since World War II. I remember, as a child, I thought that the Soviet Union was going to exist forever, that there would always be the Iron Curtain, that Eastern Europe would always be locked behind it. And then in the 1980s, behind strong leadership and increased defense spending, that Iron Curtain fell. The Berlin Wall was literally knocked down by the people that were kept prisoners behind it. And Russia became Russia again. It was no longer the Soviet Union. It wasn't because we went in and invaded those countries. It's because we stood up and showed our strength. And we proved it in ways that we could without jeopardizing the safety and security of the people in this country. And it worked. The bully fell. And now the bully wants to get back up again. A strong America is the best proponent, indeed the only effective proponent, of peace worldwide. Understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying war for war's sake, battles for battle's sake. There's not a single person in uniform in here who wants to go to war. But it's the ability to do so. It's the ability to project that strength that gives us a prospect of peace in the world. I believe that in the absence of strong American leadership, the alternatives are not desirable for any nation. And our allies, and even some people that aren't our allies, are beginning to ask this question: where is America? And they are deeply troubled by the fact that we've pulled back. Nations around China that have never been our friends are saying, wait a minute, we want America back. Nations in the Middle East that have never really been our friends are saying, wait a minute, we need America back. Nations that are sometimes our friends, sometimes not our friends in Europe are saying, wait a minute, we need America back. Exploitative nations like China and Russia, who seek increased influence in their own benefit, will not be as kind to smaller nations as they may be to us. They'll find pretexts and reasons to go after them and take them one at a time. Just ask the people in the countries that Hitler gobbled up in the 30s. The power vacuum created by an absent America will generate conflict, unrest, and a more unstable world. If we do not learn the lessons of history, they are bound to repeat themselves, leading to a scenario none of us want to face. My dad was lucky. He came back alive from the South Pacific. Michael Jack wasn't so lucky. His ship and every man on it went down when it was sunk by a German U-boat. My cousin, Mark Arnold's out there, Daddy's first cousin, the Veteran of the Year. Fought in how many conflicts? 3, Mark? That generation paid a dear price. Not all of them were wounded. Thankfully, not all of them died. But they stood up and projected American force when the world needed it. It's time for us to do that again. The United States, as the dominant power worldwide, must remain vigilant in the face of these resurgent powers so that we can lead the forces for good, the forces for liberty, the forces of democracy worldwide. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I assure you I will work tirelessly to defend our military and ensure that we have a capable and ready force supplied with the necessary resources to carry out the mission the American people have asked us to do. That's the strong America that the world needs today. For all of you who wear the uniform or have worn the uniform, God bless you. And to everyone in this room today, God bless the United States of America.